right. So you know this is being recorded for future use by other folks. Um, and I want to move us along to introductions. So, Lindsay, if you want to start us off, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be with you today. My name is Lindsay Bishop Gilmore, pronounced she, her. I'm a senior program manager here at CSH. I am based in Detroit, Michigan. I'm part of our Michigan team. And I'm excited to spend the day with, or spend colleagues on the West Coast with you all. I'm really excited to talk today about kind of creating a community within supportive housing and what does that look like? How do we support one another and really understanding the populations of folks that are moving into supportive housing and how to create that sense of belonging within supportive housing. Thanks, Lori.
Thanks, Lindsay. And my name is Lori Gutierrez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a senior program manager for the Pacific Northwest team, and I am based in Portland, Oregon. I do have experience working in PSH up in Seattle many moons ago. And I'm happy to be here to take us through just some building blocks with supportive housing, a little 101 level, just so we're doing some level setting and we're all on the same page. And one of the ways that we like to engage with you, so it's not just a long 2 hours of us talking at you, is through Menti. And so we can use this tool for polls, word clouds, gathering ideas from you. And the way that you access it is up on the screen. You can go to menti.com and enter those 8 numbers. You can use your phone and scan the QR code, which we will put up again. And those are the 2 main ways. And then if you're not a fan of all of the internet navigation, you can also just chime in the chat as well. All right. So today's agenda is we're going to do an overview of supportive housing with a focus on key components of what supportive housing should provide for folks. Lindsay's going to take us through building community, as she mentioned, and then also some national and local data about who is moving into supportive housing. And as I said earlier, one of our goals in this series of trainings is to get folks to know one another, to know who's in this space doing similar work. And so I'd like to start off with just an icebreaker, which I think that we're going to do in each of the 4 trainings. So you get used to chatting with one another. And I'm going to attempt to put us in some breakout rooms where you can share, as we've been doing in the chat, your name, the organization you work for, your role, and then if you want a topic, the topic that we came up with is, when we end homelessness in Washington, what will your next role be? And so I'm going to keep admitting folks here, and then I'm going to try to break us out into about groups of 6 or so. So give me 1 second. Yeah, well, let's do about 9 breakout rooms, and you'll be asked to go in shortly, and we'll do it for about 5 minutes, and then I'll bring you back at around 10:12. And if you need help finding your room, please just let me know. Hi, Molly and Tina. You've just missed our breakout rooms and we're coming back right now. So I'll just have you hold tight while everyone rejoins the group. All right, I think, welcome back, folks. Still waiting for everyone to join us back in the main room.
Tell me how long this goes till today?
Yes, it goes from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I think everyone is back with us. And so I hope you had time to meet a few new folks, and we will continue to do that in our future trainings. We have 3 after this. I'm going to keep us moving along here. We're going to start off, as I mentioned before, with a broad overview of what supportive housing is and is not. And before we dive in, we would love to know where you are in your understanding of supportive housing. And so I am going to break out the Menti here. And you can either go to menti.com and enter, oh, I think I have the wrong number here, 5110-6501, or you can scan with the QR code, scan with your phone the QR code. And we just want to know where you are in your PSH learning journey. And because I have the wrong one on the screen, I'm going to put the correct numbers in the chat. Oh, excuse my scrolling here. And then I'm going to switch over to a screen where we can see your results.
I can drop the numbers in the chat. Sorry.
Just did it.
Sorry.
It's okay. And then you'll go to menti.com, put in those numbers, and it'll take you right to it. Give me 1 second here to open this room up to you and see. All right. So a broad range here. I've heard a lot, but I'm not sure what it means. Some folks, a lot of folks, it says I've worked in supportive housing before, and then a few folks even know a lot about supportive housing. And so for those of you who are really familiar, I would ask that you contribute whatever you want to share with the group today. This is a learning space. We're not the only teachers here. We have something to learn from you too. So I really encourage you to share your knowledge. And for those of you who have questions, Lindsay and I think, are both pretty interruptible. And so if we are saying something that you don't understand, if we're using acronyms and forgot to spell it out, please do feel free to ask. You don't have to wait for silence. You can either pop it in the chat, you can come off mute, whatever feels comfortable for you. Great work with the Menti. We will continue to use these today. And
I'm still trying.
go ahead, Annette.
I said I'm still trying to even get to the Menti right now. So
Okay.
give me a second.
Is there a way that I can support you in that?
I think that Lori helped me. Hold on one second. My service sucks. So I'm like, I have a camera off, you can hear me better usually, but yeah. And I'm losing my voice at the moment, so it's not the best.
That is okay. All right. So we've got about 31 responses here. We're going to keep us moving along in our training. let's get us back to our presentation. All right. Oh, someone wanted the QR code. There it is for a quick second for our next one. We will have a few moments. And yes, it is complicated if you're only on phone to switch screens. I appreciate that. No worries. Okay. Let's moving along here. So thanks for sharing where you are in your journey. Now I have this again. So for those of you who needed the QR code, we also want to know, 1 second here, what you think as we're starting, what is supportive housing to you? So to get a little more specific and digging into it, in your own words, what do we mean when we say supportive housing? I know a lot of projects talk about supportive housing, media talks about supportive housing. What does it mean to you when we say supportive housing, or when you say supportive housing? And so again, I invite you to use the QR code or go to Menti. If you're not comfortable or it's difficult to access either of those, you can put it in the chat and share what supportive housing means to you.
Honest, raw truth. Government control, but
Okay.
that's
Yep.
that's
Lots
the
of supportive housing is government funded for sure.
yeah. But I like having this lived experience be in charge because they actually know what they're going through. We're not just like, oh, one of those people, you know.
Mm-hmm. So supportive housing uses the voices, brings in the voices of folks with lived experience. That's good. Supportive housing is home. Yeah. I like that. Supportive housing is community, affordable, helping people in need, supporting folks to keep their housing. Yes, that's that key component there. Reaching self-sustainability. Yeah, that is the goal. Supporting people to gain and maintain housing in a complex system. Yes, we do live in complex systems that people have to navigate. Supportive housing is a partner for folks. That's great. A hand up, not a hand out. Yeah. Low barrier permanent housing and support to stay housed. Exactly, that's right on the money. Able to live in a manner that they want to live. Help others obtain and sustain housing. This is great. Thanks everyone for participating. Foundation for relearning skills and supports needed, definitely. Meeting people where they are, building on their strengths to help them get to where they want to go is definitely strengths focused. You guys have a lot of great input here. Providing necessary input to ensure people can gain and retain stable housing, to assist individuals to acquire housing and supporting and to help maintain housing. A permanent place to call home with ongoing assistance. Yeah, I see here both it's a permanent place and also we support folks who want to move on. Permanent supportive housing with supportive services, ease of access to community services and resources. True hope is real community with real help and connecting. It improves housing stability, employment, mental and physical health, and reduces active substance use. It can do that, sure. Meeting your clients where they are to help with ongoing housing needs. I love that I'm seeing a lot of meeting folks where they're at. That's really powerful. And help gain and support to keep housing by aiding in basic life skills and lots more. Housing for people with long-term disability that is expected to last indefinitely. Disability can be physical, emotional, developmental, and intellectual. Thank you for that. Such rich responses. I'm also going to go into the chat. Empowerment, providing sustainable housing for those with challenges with support staying in their home. And a chance to relearn life skills. And real hope is real support and communities that listen and hear us all. Thank you for that. Thanks everyone. These are awesome. I will share out these responses after the training as well, so you can look on this. I think there's some great insight here. Collaborative partnership, definitely collaborative. Thank you so much for sharing all of these. Right. Okay. Let's moving along. Okay, so on a technical level, supportive housing is permanent. You don't have to stay there, but you can, and tenant-centered. And so when we say permanent, we mean that it's not time limited. And as supportive housing is tenant-centered, folks may choose to move on from supportive housing, and service providers who are there can help folks in doing so. But no tenant is forced to move on from supportive housing as long as they are able to maintain their lease. And then the flexible and voluntary services help folks access and remain in supportive housing, as well as reconnect with family and community. We can help them access employment, address substance use and mental health challenges, and improve overall health. And those are all things that I saw you mention in the chat. So great work. And as someone else also said, it just essentially provides a platform to help tenants thrive. So in a supportive housing model, we've got a few options. One of them is the single site model. And in this model, all units are within a single property or a single building, and they provide housing for a range of populations. This includes folks experiencing houselessness, folks with disabilities, including Olmsted populations and other at-risk populations. When we're talking about single site, they provide the opportunity for independent living combined with supportive services, and also that really important peer support to help promote housing stability. Property management at these sites is managed by the ownership entity or in agreement with a third-party manager. We see both. And then the owner or property management company coordinates with one or more supportive services partners to design and deliver services to supportive housing tenants and to support housing stability. And I do want to note that those services vary from site to site, depending on what folks need. And what we're seeing is increasingly single site buildings have a mix of both supportive housing and affordable housing to successfully promote that community integration. And for single site, project-based vouchers are the primary PHA tool that folks are using. Another model that we have is scattered sites. And so in this model, the supportive housing units, they can be leased by a nonprofit or used as a tenant-based rental assistance model and dispersed among multiple buildings or properties within a community. Or it could also look like single family homes. And so this model is a really great opportunity to integrate supportive housing into the general community. And it maximizes available housing stock. So you can have a range of housing types and unit sizes to meet the needs of the varying populations who might need supportive housing. It is also effective with quickly creating units in markets with vacancies in the existing housing stock. For this model, tenant-based housing choice vouchers are the primary PHA tools. And as opposed to when you have single sites, services are usually provided at the offices of the service provider through visits. Either you go to your service provider or the tenant, you go to the tenant and you can visit their home. And I also want to just emphasize again, there is no best. I think we get asked this all the time, but in a robust system, your tenants should have these choices, which means no one approach is ever one size fits all. Different people have different needs. And so the more variety we can have, the better. Now, this may get a little technical, bear with me, but we have a few types of ways to do this. When we have new construction or a rehab and acquisition, new housing develops are developed through these ways. You can do an existing structure or a new build, as they said. They can dedicate all or a portion of the units to supportive housing. And units are more often developed as single site, on a single site as one building. They can also be scattered throughout the community, like a project that includes acquisition and rehab of multiple single family homes. That may look different in rural versus, say, Seattle for sure. And then for set-asides, units of housing are set aside within affordable housing developments for use as supportive housing. And tenants usually have to meet the same entrance criteria as for the non-supportive housing tenants. And an additional rent subsidy is often required for them to be affordable to low-income folks. In leasing, we also have a few options. So we can do master lease, where we have, or sponsor-based rental subsidy, where an organization, typically a nonprofit or a government agency, contracts for or leases a portion of the units in an existing building. And so then they become the master tenant, and they in turn sublease the units to supportive housing tenants. And supportive housing projects using this method could be a small percentage of the total units in the building, all the way up into the entire building. So you have options there. When we're talking about tenant rental-based subsidy, tenants have a rental subsidy that can be used to rent units in the private rental market. Typically, they'll pay about 30% of their income towards rent, and then the subsidy pays the remainder up to fair market rent value, which is determined by HUD, which is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In this case, tenants live in units scattered throughout the community, and that gives them a little more choice in where they live so that it can meet their needs. I want to stop here and ask if anyone has questions.
I asked in the chat if there was let me see the chat. I was like, I have no brain. Is there a place that like input that like help people that are homeless get a grant to get a piece of property and maybe help with an outhouse while those people build their own home?
Oh, that's a really good question. I am not familiar with that. I would invite folks who are with us today, if you have any knowledge, to share that in the chat. That's a really good question. Do the tenants have a voice or governance in supportive housing? Ideally, yes. So when you're creating your supportive housing, there should be avenues for tenant engagement, all the way from, if you're building a new build, from what the place looks like, all the way through those ongoing services. So you can do tenant-led councils. We can engage tenants in a variety of ways, and we should be aiming to, so that the building meets the needs of the folks who are living there, the services meet the needs of the folks who are living there. Yes, so the short answer is yes, Gail. Thank you for asking that. Like an intentional living, yeah, could be. And Jay, I think this is in response to Odette. You can partner with an established nonprofit to get grants and otherwise. Thank you, Jay. All right. So as we're talking about what supportive housing is, it's also important to cover what it is not. And so it is not a treatment model. It's not a treatment method. Supportive housing programs might provide treatment-related services or connections to those, but housing is not conditional upon participation in any treatment program. Supportive housing is also not time limited, as I mentioned before. We encourage all supportive housing projects to have plans for helping folks move on once they no longer need supportive housing. But the time needed can't be prescribed. Everyone is different. Some people may choose to live the rest of their lives there. Some folks may reach a point where they want to move on into independent housing, and we support either way. And lastly, it is not licensed community care. Folks who work there, we are not licensed folks, and folks do need to be able to live somewhat independently, even though we can bring in some care to help with maintaining housing. And I see more in the comments or advisory committees, public meetings that people can attend and be heard. Yes. Is it within their rights to hold tenant meetings in a common area at a site? Yes. So if tenants want to come together and hold meetings, that should absolutely be encouraged. Common areas should be available for folks to do so. Absolutely. If they want to have a knitting group, a movie group, if they want to actually have a group that's talking about the way that things are working out and rules that they want changed, they should absolutely have a voice there. Jay says it might be good to consider a tenant committee. Absolutely. Yeah, tenant voice is essential in successful supportive housing. All right, so I also want to take a moment to differentiate PSH from emergency housing that you may have in your region. I know Seattle specifically does have what's called emergency housing. So permanent supportive housing pairs subsidized housing with case management and other supportive services. It offers wraparound services to foster housing stability, and that can include case management, counseling, behavioral health supports, medical services, meals, and the types of services that any one person receives within it will vary based on their own needs. Now, if we're talking about emergency housing, it's where folks experiencing chronic homelessness or at risk of it can reside temporarily while they're looking for permanent housing. And so it is intended to be temporary, but there is no time limit there. Emergency housing does offer housing-oriented services, case management, and other services and supports to assist in stabilizing. So there's some overlap here, but the big thing is the permanent versus temporary. I'm just catching up with the chat here. Great. All right. And moving us along. We won't dive too deeply into housing first today, but I did want to note that it does play an important role in supportive housing. Let's take a look at the traditional approach versus the evidence-based housing first approach. So on the left in this traditional approach, you see that supportive housing program or housing programs typically require tenants to be what they call housing ready prior to moving into housing. And so sometimes this requires a stay in shelter or transitional housing. It requires folks agreeing to enter treatment programs, completing job readiness programs, and other requirements while they're still living outside prior to actually moving in. And for folks who've been around a while, I wonder if this looks familiar to you, where you have to go step by step and be deemed ready by some outside organization to be in housing. That used to be the model. And I cannot imagine trying to address mental health or addiction needs or training for job readiness while not even knowing where you're going to sleep at night or how you meet basic needs. I would say that it was likely setting up tenants for failure. And what we see now is that moving a tenant into housing first, while providing those needed wraparound services, allows folks to more effectively address issues that may have contributed to their homelessness, while also having their basic needs like shelter and food met. And I want to invite you to take a moment to reflect on what supportive housing looks like in your community. What does your community's supportive housing model look like? And what does your coordinated entry look like? Do you know how someone experiencing houselessness can access assistance where you are? Do you know how long it takes for them to get the help that they need? And I think the other big thing to think about is when you're considering your current system, what are you doing now? And also what opportunities exist to understand what may need to be changed? And Kathy says, even places that are housing first, there can still be tough barriers for folks to deal with, such as eviction or criminal history or low credit score. Absolutely. And so we won't cover this today, but one of the things to think about is, do you have a low barrier screening, or is your tenant selection plan screening people out for things such as eviction or criminal history or low credit score? If we're talking about supportive housing, folks are going to need low barrier screening so that these things are not getting into their way of accessing housing. Thanks, that's a really good point, Kathy. There's also a whole conversation around how neighbors view PSH in the building, concerns with crime or violence, and how PSH staff deals with those. Absolutely, the community outreach that you will do as you're preparing to open supportive housing is intensive. It's a lot of myth busting, it's a lot of patience and inviting people in, which is a whole nother training in itself for sure. Criminal history, huge barriers. Yeah, I will share some resources after about this. I know in Multnomah County, we have a low barrier screening that folks have done. And I know there are a few others. We just did a training on it. And so I'm happy to share what other communities are doing in terms of low barrier screenings so that folks with a history of justice involvement, with evictions and things like that, are not screened out of housing that they need, for sure. And Annette, yes, the recording is sent to the HCA, who posted on their website.
Now, how low does that screening go for people who have like arson or some sex, past, some
Yeah.
sexual predator past history stuff and arson and manufacturing and all that stuff that are the people that I deal with, and they're huge barriers. And so I'm just curious as to how low that low barrier screening goes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so if we're talking about, and I don't want us to stray too far off topic, I want to make sure we get through our all of our content. But in terms of HUD, if we're talking about federally funded housing, there are two big things that will screen you out. And one of those is arson. And the other is manufactured methamphetamines within subsidized housing. Those are the two big ones. The rest are barriers that property management companies or nonprofits put up themselves for the most part. And so in the case, I know there's an organization here who actually is able to, they've created their own property management company, and they will work with folks who have high-level sex offenses on their record, with folks who have arson on their record. And so there are options, and it's most often a private landlord. So then we'd be talking scattered sites, who's willing to work with participants on lowering their barriers. And oftentimes that comes through a great amount of advocacy on the side of case managers or other folks who are supporting people in housing. So there is a lot of leeway there in terms of barriers. It's just a matter of finding the right folks to work with you on that.
I have a question. What if like with the arson stuff, like what if you were a victim of a sex crime as well as you're being a criminal and being charged because of a car accident? So crime, felon, victim, both together.
That's a
hard to
really
get in.
Yeah, no, that's a very specific question, and I don't think I have the exact answer for that. I have a general guidelines.
Yeah, more connecting is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I would say if you have individual questions, reach out to me afterwards. That'll be really good. And we can address that. And yes, there are guidelines about what low barrier looks like and the criteria. It varies by region. I will share that out afterwards. Thank you for all of your questions about that. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone who is answering in the comments. I'm going to keep us moving along here so we have time for all of our content. So the question is, why are we advocating for the creation and operation of quality supportive housing? And it's because we want tenants to experience positive outcomes, right? And so in general, when we're talking about supportive housing, we talk about outcomes in 5 primary buckets. And so the things that we are aiming for with supportive housing that is quality and successful is that it breaks the cycle of housing instability for tenants and ensures they remain in housing as long as they want to, whether it's at our site or at another building for themselves or a house. A second thing we're looking for is that tenants improve their physical and mental health. So the associated services should help tenants access needed physical and mental health care. And in many cases, folks are able to improve their health status. We see that pretty regularly in quality supportive housing. We also see tenants increase their or maintain their income and their employment. So often we can help folks obtain benefits that they were already eligible for, or if they are able and wanting to work, we can help them find employment that fits their needs. And in cases where folks are already employed or already have all their benefits, we can help ensure that they maintain their income. The fourth bucket is that tenants, when asked, are satisfied with their services and with their housing. Tenant satisfaction is a really important outcome that ultimately affects the quality of life for everybody. And the ability of supportive housing projects to help them, tenants achieve housing stability, excuse me. And the last one, and really important here, is that tenants have social and community connections. And so we want folks to develop connections both within the larger community and also within the building. And then also that often looks like rebuilding connections with family and friends that they maybe lost contact with over the years. And I'm going to take a question here. How often is intellectual and developmental disability brought into focus as a potential cause and concern? Jay, can you say more about a disability being a potential cause? The cause of what?
Homelessness and housing issues. I have dyslexia and ADHD and on the autism spectrum, and it has been the bane of my existence to keeping jobs, keeping going, saying things wrong, working in community groups. Just about every part of my life gets distorted at some point in time because of my intellectual disabilities. And we're kind of a normal brain processing society. And so there's a lot of us who just give up at a certain point in a lot of processes, including housing, because communication is difficult. We feel like we're speaking a different language. And a lot of people don't even know they have intellectual disabilities. They're in this portion of existence where they're too high functioning to be labeled or be allowed to get diagnosis, or don't have the money for diagnosis. It costs almost $2,000 for that. And then we're stuck in limbo because we can't keep jobs, but we can function long enough to get going in life, and then it all falls apart 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line. And it's never really been something that's focused on. And all the treatment for people at my level of poverty get kind of 6 months with a counselor instead of a regular actual counselor treatment for long-term care. So everything becomes cyclical and everything falls apart over time. And I don't see people looking at those mid-ground people as, well, they might have an intellectual disability, but they just can't function like everybody else. And that becomes chronic homelessness for a lot of us. And I just don't really often see it in permanent supportive housing as maybe that person just has a brain that doesn't work for a week, every month or 3 months.
Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable. I really appreciate you saying that. I will say, from what I see, I don't see a lot of permanent supportive housing specifically focusing on IDD and folks who live with that. And so that's, I want to validate what you're experiencing for sure. And for folks who are not diagnosed and maybe don't know, how do you advocate for yourself if you don't even know what support you need, or that you may have an intellectual disability? That is challenging.
We're having to repeat it over and over and over again. It's just traumatizing. So and I think
so much of that depends on our staff trained to work with folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Can we put things in plain language? Can we be aware of neurodiversity, right? We all are somewhere on that spectrum, which is being recognized more and more. And how do we create spaces and places that work for us, right, in our various neurodiversities? Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And Molly says, we see the need for PSH for people with IDD, and we're advocating for more awareness. We need so much more explanation and communication. Yeah, that is true. And I'm glad to hear that we are spreading awareness and advocating for more awareness around this. And it looks like someone recommended DVR as a wonderful resource for those working with disabilities. Thank you for everyone's participation in this. And Jay, if you have resources that you would like to share with folks that they are more, so that they're more aware, I welcome you to put them in the chat as well. All right, so this is actually a time for questions. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts or things that they would like to share right now?
Mine's just lived experiences that I'm pretty stoked that I saw a lot of Kitsap County people trying to help, because
Yeah.
that middle ground, like when you make too much money but not enough money to survive, it really sucks. Like the minute there, it seemed like if I was on drugs, I might get home more than I would, because I'm losing my mind from moving forward and that kind of thing. And seeing all these people here gives me hope. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. Someone is sharing that their mom has an intellectual disability, lives in assisted living, and when renewal time comes for assistance, she has no one to advocate for her. Yeah, that's really challenging, and I'm so sorry that there's not someone there. There should be someone there to help her for sure.
I would just share from my own experience. I think, and I've seen a number of folks that have moved into supportive housing, and because of their chronicity, people maybe have physical health diagnosis or chronic health diseases or a mental health diagnosis, which has allowed them to enter supportive housing or move in. But they may have things like intellectual disability, a learning disability, ADHD, autism, a traumatic brain injury that's never been diagnosed. And so I think what I'm hearing and all of that you all are sharing is just the importance of, I think lots of times our focus is on mental health and substance use, understandably so. And that oftentimes is the is due to some of these untreated underlying health conditions that a person is learning to cope with. And so making sure that within our service delivery, within supportive housing, we know what it requires. As someone with ADHD that got diagnosed much later in my life, it is a beast to navigate that. And so what is the process to get the appropriate level of testing, finding a psychiatrist that can work with you, especially if it's someone that is taking other medication that may have interactions. And so as we're thinking about the services related to supportive housing, one of the things that I'm hearing from you all is making sure that there is that comprehensiveness, that a person may not be entering supportive housing because of intellectual disability, but they may have it, but it's never been diagnosed. And how can we make sure that we know how to navigate those systems and connect people, and that it's we leave no stone unturned, if you will, and connecting people to the services that they need. So just wanted to share that.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that.
I had a question really quick for Annette directly. Annette, are you in Kitsap County?
Yeah.
Okay, have you come to Kitsap Community Resources?
In the past, yeah.
Okay, I would
It's hard.
recommend,
I have to redo it all the time.
okay, I would recommend coming back in and talking to someone. Okay, because there are resources. I don't know your circumstance, but I'm just letting you know that we're here for you.
Not it's not to use foul language, but we call it a fuck shit stacks situation. Anytime I tell anybody about our lives, everyone's stuck in a corner. They don't know what to say.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like I said, I encourage you to come back and we'll see what we can do, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. And on that note, let's take a 10-minute break. So I will see you at 11:03. And if you want to reach out to other folks, you're welcome to. Yeah, we'll see you back at 11:03. Thank you. All right. So we've done a little bit of baseline setting. Now I want to move us on to key components of supportive housing. And I just do want to say thank you for all of your participation today. It's been great. And so when we're talking about supportive housing, all quality supportive housing includes these key components. And so I want to spend a little bit of time on each one of these. Most tenants in supportive housing will have had experience, as we know, with various types of institutional living. And so that includes shelters, mental health institutions, incarceration, foster care, etc. And so these institutions can be traumatizing for folks. And it's essential that we consider how to make sure our project does not include any rules that are similar to those in those types of living situations. And so moving on to this first one, engaging households with multiple barriers. I wonder if we can have a volunteer to read the 5 dots that are on the screen.
Persons experiencing chronic homelessness, veterans, transition age youth, other adults, persons with extremely low incomes, persons involved in the child welfare and justice system, frequent users of crisis system, persons with disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, mental health, substance use disorders, HIV or AIDS. Who else?
Thank you, Shreya. That's great. So supportive housing is for households with multiple barriers to accessing housing. It's for folks who, without services, would not be able to access and maintain housing, and without housing are unable to effectively engage in the services that they need. And compared with other very low income folks, these men and women and other folks disproportionately use shelters. Folks on the screen, emergency health care, public mental health services, often cycling rapidly through institutions. And supportive housing can help break this cycle by providing that affordable housing and also the services that folks need to remain stably housed. The second key component is that the housing is affordable. So the tenant should, or the household, if you've got more than one person living there, should pay no more than 30% of their income towards rent and utilities, and never more than 50% of income towards such housing expenses. And what I will say is that for folks who are living on SSI, I think it's $943 this year. I don't know what the increase is for next year. 30% is still a lot of income. How do you live on $600 a month? It is still a tough thing, even with subsidized housing. For those of you who may have projects that are actually under development, this is a technical wonky thing, but the affordability piece has to be worked into your operating budget. If this doesn't apply to you, ignore it. And once your sites are open, we have to think about providing ways to keep the housing affordable. And that might look like payment plans for folks who are short on rent, working programs for missed or late rent. If folks might need help with their budgeting, maybe a representative payee is an option. And then education on keeping down utility costs or accessing those utility assistance programs. And Tina, I'm going to turn my volume up. Let me know if that's helpful for you. All right. Sorry about that, Tina. Let me know if you can hear me better now. My volume is all the way up. Oh, great. Glad you can hear. If it's too loud, also let me know. And Jay shares ABD is only $450 a month. And Nicole is estimated to be 2.6%. Thank you for sharing that. The next key component we have here, well, subcomponent of this one is that folks who are in supportive housing, their leases are identical to tenants who are not in supportive housing. So all tenants have a lease that looks like the lease that I sign if you're renting, the lease that you sign, or a sublease. And ideally, the term of the lease should be 1 year. Yeah, just a lease like you or me, there's not special rules or requirements. And also, we want to support housing unit choice. So we want to ensure that tenants are offered opportunities to live in the type of housing that best suits their needs and desires and supports their ability to participate in the community. For folks with sensory challenges, they may not want to live in an 80-unit apartment complex. Maybe they need something smaller, things like that. And we want to, when we're able to, offer tenants a choice between multiple units and also between housing models and locations, so it suits their needs. And when we understand and ask what tenants' choices are and what their needs are, we can help them in the process of searching and selecting an appropriate unit. We also want tenants to have a clear understanding of their rights and responsibilities. So as staff that are supporting folks moving in, we walk folks through the lease agreement and we clearly explain rights and responsibilities. We want the tenant to have a copy of their lease and make sure that they're aware of what the process for lease violations looks like, and also what the grievance process looks like or an appeals procedure if they are given a violation and they don't agree with it. And we also want to make sure that tenants are supported in requesting and obtaining any reasonable accommodations that they might need to successfully continue their tenancy. Now, leases can be really full of legalese. There are some options that are called plain language leasing, and I can share that after the training as well. And there are ways to make it more accessible so that folks aren't wading through 19 pages. I've seen a lease like up to 70 something pages. That was the longest one I've ever seen. There are versions of leases that are written in simple, direct language so that folks understand what they are signing. And the more that we can make sure folks understand their rights, the better. And most importantly, we want to make sure that we don't have service participation agreements. So like tenants in other non-supportive housing buildings, folks should not be evicted for choosing not to participate in services, for not taking their medication, or for not being sober. Supportive housing really works to keep people housed, right? We want to prevent eviction. But when we may get to a point that eviction is the only option, it should only be for a lease violation, such as repeated and ongoing failure to pay rent, or violence within the building. And we want to make sure that we're not removing anyone from housing without going through the legal eviction process. And it should be the very, very last resort. There should be an eviction prevention process, compassionate lease enforcement, several steps that folks that you should have gone through before we're reaching the point of eviction. thinking a little bit more about the lease and supportive housing, we want to make sure our application processes are accessible. So we don't want this process, as we mentioned earlier, to create yet another barrier. And so as we're thinking, some of you mentioned this, what does barrier-free mean to you? And what does it look like in your county? What are you seeing? I've seen people saying credit history has been used, eviction history, history of justice involvement. Sounds like those are some of the things that you're seeing in even supportive housing application processes. Landlord references.
I was on a wait list forever, and I was finally next, but then I didn't have income, so I started all over again.
Oof.
I had real income, like for 7 years,
Mhm.
and then right when I finally got in, they're like, I don't have income anymore. So I was like, they were nice enough to at least keep me on through the next round, at least.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. What do I want to say about this? I think when we're in supportive housing, we want to work to screen people in rather than screen people out. We want to be aware of poor credit, negative housing history, past substance use, justice involvement. The application process should be as barrier-free as possible. As I mentioned earlier, I'm happy to share some examples of what that might look like. And yeah, I'll share that after. And we also want to make sure that the process for this supportive housing site is really streamlined. So folks don't have to share the same information 20 different times with 20 different people. And it's clearly stated so that we can spell it out for people each step. When we're thinking about being trauma informed, people want to know what's coming next. How long does this process take? How many steps are there? So if we can spell it out for people in the very beginning so they know what to expect, that's helpful. I would appreciate that myself. And also the application process should be completely separate and unrelated to assessment for services. And they should be fully accessible to folks with disabilities. So if folks have limited, what would I say, limited literacy, if there are vision challenges, there should be options for folks to still apply successfully for housing. We also want to make sure that we are being proactive in asking folks if they need a reasonable accommodation. And if they do, that we can provide supports during the application and screening processes. That can often be the thing that screens people out, is there's a process, but maybe they didn't know to ask for it, they don't know how to navigate it, and they don't have support to do so. And so making sure that we build those into the application process. And then it's also really a good idea to have timely and really clearly stated processes for the approval or the denial of housing, and also for appeals if they are appealing a denial. There should be an established system for staff to communicate with tenants during the process. Yes, go ahead, Lindsay.
Oh, I think Jay had their hand up first.
Oh, yes, Jay, sorry, I'm looking at two different screens. Go ahead,
It's
Jay.
okay. And I've already been talking a lot, so I don't mind if you go ahead of me to other people or let other people go first.
Nope, go ahead.
But I see a lot of the problems is that we don't have direct access to our permanent supportive housing. We have to go through services. We have to go through CT, or we have to go through DSHS, or we have to, there's no direct, hey, I need permanent supportive housing. We can just go to a list and apply for it. That's super complicated and hard. We have to have a referral. And if we don't have a social worker or a referral program, we can't get into an application process.
Mhm. Lindsay, I didn't know if yours had anything to do with that or if you have a separate question.
It did
entirely.
not, but no,
Okay.
it did not.
Okay. Yeah, so the trainings here are heavily geared towards folks who are running supportive housing. And so ideally, the folks that you're supposed to connect to should know these things. That's the goal here, is creating training so that folks know that these systems do need to be set up so that they serve folks who, and are not missing folks, folks are not falling through the cracks. Where it sounds like you can't even access, the application process because there are barriers being put up. That's not a system that's working well. And it sounds like there could be room for some improvement there.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jay, go ahead.
It's okay, but that's the reason I bring it up here, is that
Mhm.
if we are the ones providing permanent supportive housing, then we need to know we need to create those avenues. And unless we say something, we can't start working on creating those side avenues through like Tacit or other programs that are not ones that you have a service provider. So everybody does know that here. Without the awareness, we can't create spaces to enter application processes outside of situations.
Yes, no, I appreciate it. Thank you for saying that. Systems are often siloed, and that is one of the challenges in supportive housing.
Yeah, and I think, Jay, like what you're elevating is just like how can people access no matter where they show up, because some people haven't been able to access housing because they weren't able to navigate processes or apply themselves. But I think also if you're not able to connect with a service provider, that's also a huge barrier. And so what I hear you saying is we've got to think about all the different ways in which people might be able to access housing, that folks aren't being excluded for especially when it's because of kind of lack of service issues or service quality issues. One of the things that I just wanted to add, and I think it gets at Erica's question in the chat a little bit about when your agency provides the supportive services and not the housing. And I'm also reflecting earlier on some of the background screening issues that were elevated as well. I think a lot of housing providers don't actually know what is required screening criteria versus what is not required. I know in my experience working in Michigan, but then also across the country, there's this idea of here's what HUD requires, whether it's housing choice vouchers or if it's a low-income housing tax credit project or however it's kind of financed. There is this misunderstanding, whether that's intentional or unintentional, I don't know, of what is expected around screening. And so I think part of our role, when maybe you are the one providing the services and not the housing, is like knowing what the requirements are and where and how to push back. And if you're partnering, and if you have like a housing partner that you're working with on a number of different units, and it's a partnership, really pushing them back on what are those screening criterias. And I realize as I say this that like most people don't care what research says, and so let me preface what I'm about to say. There is a lot of research out there now that demonstrates that criminal history, credit, I name the different things, have nothing to do with someone paying their rent. And so while I know that like people typically don't like, well, the research shows, so don't like virtually like throw anything at me. But there is a lot more out there about that. And HUD at a national level has started to point out problems with a lot of the third-party screening criteria, the data quality, the intent of it. And so I think there's a lot more to back your advocacy when it comes to that as well. And so part of this is just about like, how do we educate and hold our partners accountable within this work? And I'm sorry that I'm like the person that said, but the research shows, so please forgive me.
Thank you. Show the real research, because they kind of like to hold some of it back. Gotta dig.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. yeah, all of the research that we have shows that these things have no bearing on a person's ability to be a good tenant in supportive housing. Which leads me to my last piece of barrier-free applications. The application and intake processes should include the minimum number of questions needed to determine tenant eligibility. Can you imagine what a lease might look like if we just had the bare, like, what is the absolute information that we need to have to know if someone is ready, can move into this building? That would be really powerful. And I also see a comment from Miranda about Skagit County. Cause a huge barrier. So one agency is in charge of referrals and verification, which causes a huge barrier to get people into housing and services. We've addressed this by creating relationships with partners and becoming an approved agency to verify and refer those who have a need and qualify. And Miranda advises, remain curious and find out what training, certifications, etc. are needed to be an approved referring agency. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I would also say, I hope that process would be open to being modified too, so it's not a huge barrier to becoming an approved referring agency, so that your smaller nonprofits, your culturally specific nonprofits might be able to make successful referrals as well. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement. Our fourth key piece of supportive housing is that we engage tenants in flexible and voluntary services. So we want to make sure that the folks who are providing supportive services use a variety of proactive and creative strategies to engage folks either on site or in their community-based supportive services. So I like to think of it as like, it is not the tenant's job to engage, it is the staff's job to keep reaching out and keep reaching out and keep reaching out. Even though it's not a requirement of ongoing tenancy, we want to make sure that someone doesn't tell us no once. We're like, okay, we don't need to talk to them anymore. We need that proactive engagement to make sure that we are meeting the needs of folks. We need to do that relationship building and spending time just getting to know folks so that they do feel comfortable reaching out when they maybe are ready to receive some services. And we also want to make sure that in delivering services to folks, we use the most appropriate techniques or best practices based on each tenant's unique needs. It's not a one size fits all. And that thinks, yeah, I think of it as being a neighbor. Yeah, we want to make sure that we're making opportunities to just talk to people without some goal in mind. Just sit in the milieu, talk with people, get to know them. What are their interests? What do they like to do?
Well, when we were kids, you'd always go to your neighbor, if you needed sugar. Remember how it used to be more like that? Didn't matter what neighborhood you grew up in. I lived in Vegas. I lived in not the nicest neighborhood, but guess what? It was still a neighborhood. Still helped each other out. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we lack now. Community work. I think everyone just rather attack, and we need to come together. That's why I like these groups.
Yeah, we want to create a community where we're living. I like to live in community with folks. I also like the option of whether or not I choose to engage. Some days I do want to be in community, some days I don't. And we do know, and I'm going to point to research again, a significant percentage of folks who live in supportive housing voluntarily use at least one supportive service. So we know there's need. We know that folks do want to engage. We have to be creative and persistent and be there when they're ready. And we want to make sure that staff who are providing services are educated about some evidence-based techniques to engage and support tenants when they're thinking about changing behavior. So we want to make sure we're aware of the stages of change model. We have our motivational interviewing skills. We want to make sure that folks are coming with cultural humility as we're engaging with folks from diverse communities. And as we talked about, neurodivergencies, and we want to make sure that these services are not time limited and they're available throughout someone's tenancy. Thank you, Erica. We're meeting folks where they're at and not where we want them to be. Yeah, we're not there to tell people what to do. We may have gone on maybe a recovery journey or similar and think, this is the way to do it. I need everyone to do it. They're going to love it. It's going to be life-changing. And they want nothing to do with that.
Yeah,
Yeah, when we're delivering services, it's not about us, it's about the tenant. And Miranda says walking beside people.
I think personally, it's just I have like a punk rock mind when I was like younger. The more help I get from the government, the more control they have of me. So I used to work extra, like just to make sure I didn't even try to get food stamps or any of that, even though I was struggling. So I was like, nope, I got this. But oh, because the system got me. So so now I'm like screwed. Because now I can't even talk and all I got stuff with my mental issues. So it's like I never even told anyone about a cyst in my brain. I was like, nope. I think that was my barriers myself.
Mhm. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it can feel, those are some of the things that folks may feel, right? I don't want to engage because the more I engage, the more the system has control of me, other things like that. What we can do is just continue being there, continue being a friendly face. And even if that's where the relationship stops, that's fine. You know, we have a connection to that tenant, and that's wonderful. We also want to make sure that as folks are moving in, services staff are checking in more often. That's the place to begin that rapport building, beginning to understand what folks need, what their needs might be. And then we also then want to maybe as needs determined, a little less as folks are settled in. And if we know that folks are in their substance use, we need to be able to anticipate and manage potential negative consequences of substance use. So we need to be in conversation with folks and planning with them so that we know how to support them. And we also want to make sure that when folks are using substances and in housing, we are proactively working to prevent those evictions. So we're planning with folks, if you relapse, how do we support you? If you are on a binge and rent is due, how do we support you in making sure that rent is paid? Real life things like that. Those are conversations that we're going to want to have with tenants.
Lori,
Yeah,
if I
go
can
ahead.
if I can just add also, I think that in order to have like I think the conversations that you're talking about is about substance use or sex work or whatever it may be. Like culture is a big part of how much people share, and do they feel like it is a space in which they can fully be transparent, knowing that in a lot of other systems active substance use has like led to negative them getting kicked out of programs or whatever it may be. And so creating a space and I think using tools like motivational interviewing and trauma-informed care to really create the culture in which people feel like they can be honest and open without some of the kind of negative consequences that maybe they've experienced within other systems. And I just want to say that's really hard. It also goes against, or not against, but I think it's this I'm a social worker and I have a degree in social work, and I think that isn't always how education in this work is taught. And so just that culture piece, and yes to all of the things that you have on this slide, but just wanted to share that piece.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think as someone who's worked in this field so long doing direct service, I do take that for granted that like, yeah, we're going to engage in awkward conversations every day and it's going to be challenging. Yeah, I glossed over that. I want to acknowledge this work is hard. It is ongoing. It's up one day, down the next. People are people, right? Healing is not linear. Folks are going to have bad days just like we do. And it is our job as service providers, as developers, as operators, to know that this is hard, to have things, these are other trainings as well, but to have things in place to support your staff as they're doing this work, to encourage your staff to keep on going, and to keep, you know, even when it feels really hard, to keep trying to build that culture within the building where we can have those conversations. And it's not a one and done. We do a meet and greet, we meet a few times, and then we have this beautiful relationship. It may take a year. I worked with a guy for a year who I just sat with him every morning while he quietly drank his coffee. I read my book. A year of just sitting with no intention, just being with him before he would even tell me his name. I mean, I could look it up in the system, but like before he would introduce himself. Everyone is worth taking that time. Everyone deserves the time that they need to feel comfortable with you. You have to have rapport. Thanks, Seth. Yeah. And you have to be authentic. If you're not authentic and you have a goal in mind or something that you want them to do, folks are going to call that out in a minute. Approach authentically and with humility. Thank you for mentioning that, Lindsay. I'm going to talk.
I think I'm more blunt than I should be. It's my use of time.
Yeah, some folks are used to being blunt and some folks are quiet. You get the whole range of folks, right? And so we're there for all of that. Yep, welcome back, Jay. And so I just want to talk a second again about why voluntary services are so important. So Housing First projects are predicated on the idea that everyone deserves a place to live, right? That is housing is a human right. And so we focus on housing the tenant first without preconditions. We can't house folks quickly if we require them to address all of what we see as their issues first. Even staff, I hope, come to you with experience of substance use or foster care or houselessness. We ourselves are not issue free, but we have a place to live. You know, everyone deserves that. And our focus is on keeping folks housed. We can't keep folks housed if we evict them for relapse or failure to participate in services. The job of the tenant is to follow the rules of their lease. It's not to stay sober or to agree to case management. And so we work hard, as we've been talking about, to form those effective service relationships. And we can't have that, as Lindsay said, if folks are worried they're going to lose their housing, if they tell you that they've relapsed or that they're paying rent or, you know, helping pay the rent with sex works. Yeah, it may take time for folks to trust us because, like Lindsay said, in many of these places, there are punishments for those things and judgment. And so when we keep services voluntary, that allows for more open interaction with folks. And I do want to address that many agencies would worry that voluntary services means that folks will not engage in services. And we know that at first folks may not be receptive. And so it's about that consistency and ensuring that they're being made available. We are being made available to folks. And we're offering folks what they want. And I think I've repeated a lot of this. I also want to take time to say, you may have this range of services at some point, but it's really important to take time to reevaluate the success of those services that you're offering. Are you offering classes or services and connections that people actually want? Or is it stuff that you think people should want and then they're not engaging in? So we really want to empower folks to choose which services are most meaningful and impactful for themselves, for their families, and then pay attention to the trends in attendance, ask for feedback, regularly ask for feedback. And I think it can be really difficult for staff to step back and allow folks to make choices they disagree with without taking on that parent or the teacher role or like boss role even. And I think there's this desire in wanting to make people better or however you want to change people, that we don these roles so we can convince or coerce folks into changing and making different choices or partaking in services the way that we as advocates think is best. But that's not the way to get the results that we're looking for. If we're looking for results, we're just looking for people to be stable in their housing. And it doesn't mean that we can't have open and honest conversations with residents about their choices. As we mentioned, we're going to have those conversations. But it does mean that ultimately clients are going to make the choices they're going to make, just like we as humans are going to make the choices we're going to make, bad and good and otherwise. And so we respect the choices that folks make, even if it's not the one that maybe we would wish to see. Moving on to our fifth component, of supportive housing coordination among key partners. In supportive housing, the primary service provider should establish connections to mainstream and community-based resources, and then facilitate the tenant's connections to those resources, either on site or in the community as the tenant requests. And I want to say that you should strike a balance between offering what you can on site with the staff that you have and also connections to external partners. It's not realistic to expect your staff to have the expertise to offer everything. That will quickly overwhelm someone. Everyone will be underserved that way. And so when we're connecting to community partners, we do want to vet them to make sure that there is alignment in values. And we want to have those relationships formalized with a memorandum of understanding or an MOU. And that helps define the role of both partners and helps create transparency, creates trust, and then in turn helps things run smoothly for our tenants. That is it for me. I am going to pass this along to my colleague, Lindsay, to take you through the last component of supportive housing, which is related to community.
Thank you, Lori, and thanks for all of the comments in the chat. I do want to lift up one thing Chelsea added. As we were talking about building rapport and authentic relationships, this requires that service staff have reasonable caseloads, good benefits and compensation, and are supported in kind of navigating, I think, what could be re-traumatizing situation or triggering situations, which it is really hard when you see someone, that you care about, that you have a relationship with, that maybe are making choices that are potentially harmful. And so yes, that having service agencies that are supporting their staff, you have kind of ratios of tenants to staff that are low enough that allow people to build those authentic relationships, and sometimes just sit there in silence in order to build that relationship. So I just wanted to acknowledge that one piece. So the sixth kind of component, and when we think about supportive housing, many of you all mentioned it in the very first question, which was, how would you define supportive housing? And it was the word community. It came up a lot. And so I want you to think about, or I'm asking you to think about sometime in your life, how has your community, and you can define this however you want, like how has your community supported you? And I'm going to go back, Lori, just one slide really quickly before we go to the mentee. Like how has your community supported you? This could be your neighbors, it could be your friends, it could be your family. What does community support look like? How have you been supported by your community? And you can just enter it in the chat. How have you been supported?
Brandy Coos.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Annette.
Oh, I said Brandy Coos. She recorded my court case. I felt more support by that, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
And I know Pittsburgh. I know no one knows a lot about Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh, they gave me hope because it opened me up to all these other places.
Yeah, that's really, it kind of opens you up. It's having people to share resources with you. Having someone to vent to. Yes, like having a community of people that can that you can share your frustrations with whatever is going on, that show up for you, that root for you, that kind of can provide the support as needed, help connect to healthcare resources that are adequate and affordable, having kind of a church or some sort of spiritual or faith-based community, a local community college change the course of your life. Yeah. Having a community, sharing lived experiences, seeing that positive change is possible. Yeah, I think having a community sometimes you're able to see from those people around you what's possible. They can give you hope, maybe when you don't have that feeling of hope. Having neighbors that are like sharing with you, you know, I know in my specific neighborhood, I always have people that are watching my back for whatever it may be, that allows for me to feel safe in my neighborhood as well. Yeah, these are all really, really, really fantastic. And being inclusive by making all feel welcome. Yeah, creating a space kind of where you can be yourself. When I think about a community, that's what that means for me. And so when we're talking about supportive housing, within the supportive housing context, part of it is about how are our residents feeling connected within the community. And so this is going to happen if you have like a site-based project. You're creating a community within the four walls. And that may be through groups that you're offering. So Seth just dropped in the chat like AA or NA. You're creating that community within those four walls. It could be through tenant councils, which someone had mentioned earlier. It could be through a knitting group that you have within the building. I was talking with some residents of a supportive housing development here in Detroit that it was fairly new, mostly young adults in the building, and they were creating an album drop release party for albums that they were excited were coming out. And I was like, yes, this is community. This is what it looks like. And some of that is coordinated by service providers. Some of it happens naturally. And there's this fine line of like feeling too forced. And this is, I think, where that connection and listening to people with lived experience, having tenants that like are open to sharing, like, no, this doesn't feel right. But having that kind of connection and community within the building can feel really, really powerful. And can kind of do all of those things that you feel when you're in a space that you feel supported, that you feel like you belong. There's the internal community, and then there's kind of the external community. And so if a tenant is living in a scattered site, kind of tenant-based with a private market landlord, how are you making sure, especially if it's a neighborhood that's new to them, how are you making sure that like they know how to get to their church or mosque or wherever they may be worship, or the nearest pharmacy or grocery store? Helping them identify, you know, are there things that they care about that they want to know within the community, kind of where that is located. And so creating that sense of community external to the building can be really, really powerful. And it's kind of that step beyond the kind of services that Lori was talking about that are, I'm going to use the word clinical, that's not the right word, but that are kind of more programmatic. And how are we making sure that people kind of are feeling that sense of community, but then also they have access to kind of other resources, whether it's transportation, education, employment, other types of services, and so on and so forth. And I love that there's like chat going on that I can't read as fast as it's going. So thank you all for that. It makes me feel good. A co-op for crafters. Count me in. Yes, I love that. Jay, I love that idea. So kind of the next question that goes along with this is like, what does community mean to you? What does it mean to you? How would you define it? And yeah, what does it mean to you? If you had a couple of words, and we have a mentee for this. Thank you, Lori, for bringing that up. We have a mentee, and so you can go back to the link that you were using earlier. I'll drop it in here. If you still have that link open. What does community mean to you? Companions. Yeah, you have companions within the community. Okay, here we go. I see support, Jean in the chat. Yes. Values, yeah, there's kind of that value alignment at times that there's trust, that you're accepted, that there's this feeling of acceptance. And when I think about acceptance, it's not that we agree on everything, but that maybe when we disagree, that we're accepted just as much as when we agree. The sense of home, that community is in places that you're creating a sense of togetherness. Oh, fellowship, similarities. Yeah. So finding, I know that like a lot of supportive housing service programs are built around groups or whatever that may be, where there is that similarity, where we have some sort of shared experience or shared love of something. Yeah. Wholesome. That it's a human interaction. Yes. I think in our world, it's really easy to feel isolated. And for somebody that's maybe, just moving into housing for a really long time and is really nervous about it, having kind of that human interaction with one another can be incredibly powerful. Having someone like say hello to you or smile at you can be really powerful as well. Yeah, we all need community, absolutely. And I think as we think about I love all of the camaraderie, trust, safety, resources, understanding, that we stand together, hope and compassion. Yeah, these are all fantastic. And also the word cloud, if you're not familiar, as you're entering the words, if a word is entered more than once, it shows up larger. So acceptance has been written by multiple people, which is really cool and exciting. And I saw you just come off mute, but I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't mean to go off mute. I just said that's I like it, and I'm very bad. I interrupt all the time, so I'm glad about the mute button. I didn't like it in court, but now I like it.
Involvement, yeah, absolutely. Being heard, yes, acknowledgement. Yeah, all of these things. Yes. Thank you, Lori, for pulling that up. And so as I'm looking at these kind of words, I think about how do we do this within supportive housing? And Lori had talked about kind of the different models of supportive housing earlier, whether it's site-based or kind of scattered site within the community. It's how do we create community? And it's not that we're creating every group or every every sort of interaction, but part of our work within supportive housing is to help people create community. And I think remembering, as this kind of slide shares, that it's through community that we create this kind of sense of resiliency. And folks that we are working with that are moving into supportive housing have navigated a lot within their lives, and creating that spirit of community to sustain community can be incredibly powerful. And it's acknowledging and kind of recognizing kind of that history. I think, Annette, as you said earlier, like, I think previously we lived in a world where we would go next door to ask for sugar, and now we may just click a button on our phone and some app will deliver sugar to our house and we never have to interact with anyone. And so how do we kind of create this spirit of community that we have had, and that people may have, as they're experiencing homelessness, they have a community, and how do we continue to support that within supportive housing? That's a
Well, with the whole, like, my neighborhood was not the safest, but we knew the neighborhood protect all children. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
The guy's not safe for our kids. Especially the neighborhood got him out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of in creating that community, we can create safety for ourselves as well. So part of I want to touch on community engagement, because that is a big part of creating community. Is how do we hear from people, our supportive housing residents that are living in supportive housing. How do we have relationships with people that have lived experience, are currently unhoused, and also kind of our community partners, whether that's other service providers, our neighbors that are kind of next to our agencies or housing. And part of kind of equitable community engagement is kind of the goal of equitable and community engagement is, this is the goal, it's not always achievable, but that when residents and people that are a part of the housing, the services, feel more included in the decision making that's ultimately serving them, while also creating better outcomes for the community and what they want. And so kind of these are some of the principles of how to do that. And this, I've seen these used when developing, if a nonprofit agency is developing new supportive housing, and so building a building, working with surrounding neighbors, because there's a lot of NIMBY-ness that is happening across the country. And so part of this is about engaging the community to hopefully lessen the opposition to housing, which I know is not always possible, but creating a space that's both informal and educational, that's flexible, and so that there are, that it's not kind of, it can only be this way, that it's open-minded, that there's this sense of creativity. And so I was with recently a group of supportive housing residents and people that have experienced homelessness that were working with a nonprofit agency that was developing housing, on the design of the building, on literally what would it look like, and what are some of the things that people want and need when they're first moving into their apartment, so that there was that sense of kind of being open-minded, but also that there's that creativity, that there's that shared respect, and then kind of there's this community vision, while also understanding that it may be site focused on a specific site, but how do we make sure that there's this recognition that it's impacting the community as well. Yes, Jay, kind of trauma-informed design, absolutely, and engaging with people with lived experience in that way. I think another kind of piece is recognizing that language matters, that, you know, we're using a people first language as much as possible. And then the other piece, and someone told me this just recently, and like it was another lesson learned for me, is that don't ask questions if you're not going to use that information for anything. And whether that's be with whether that's, you know, with a survey or through engagement with their neighbors, kind of don't ask questions if you're not actually going to change anything, or that you're not going to use that information for anything. Okay, really quickly, I just realized the time. I want to just touch on some very quick data. But I first just want to acknowledge, and I think this came up really earlier, that, you know, almost all communities are experiencing a housing crisis, some more than others, some are feeling it more deeply than others. And that kind of supportive housing is a piece of the housing that needs to be created. And so as we talk about, as we're sharing some of this national and local data, that kind of framing it from a place of how do you use this data to develop housing, create housing, but then also provide services, develop services based on this population. So I will be quick going through these. And as I share this data, I just want to acknowledge that talking about perhaps different populations, that that we're recognizing that it is that the reason people are experiencing homelessness is because of the lack of housing and also systematic inequities. And so that's why we're kind of talking about populations and the services that we need. So LGBTQ plus LGBTQIA plus. Data shows that we know that this is a population that experienced significant housing discrimination in the past, that throughout kind of the data that we are seeing, that more people are people that identify as transgender, that is increasing, and that could also be that more people are comfortable in sharing that data for the first time, or sharing that information about themselves the first time. And so as we think about community and safety and belonging, how are our services really taking this population into mind? How are we creating that place of belonging where people feel like they can openly share their pronouns, they can identify really vulnerable information about themselves, and recognizing that it's a population that has experienced a significant amount of traumatic experiences as well. And then, okay, I have 1 minute. Share this kind of another population that we're seeing and have seen for a number of years continuously increase, and that people are aging in supportive housing, meaning they've been living in supportive housing a long time and are aging in place there. Also, people that are moving into supportive housing are tending to be older. And when I say older, it's like 45 to 50. And we're identifying that as an older population because people that have experienced homelessness are almost 20 years older than their peers, meaning that they have a lot like health complexities that older people that haven't experienced homelessness would never really experience in the same sort of way. And so people are going to be aging in place in supportive housing, and so that's going to impact the service delivery, and kind of really thinking about that as you're providing services and also developing housing as well. Okay, last question, last slide, I promise, and then I will stop talking. So in Washington, homelessness is rising, as you guys probably all know very well. And you can see this over many years. And this is from the point in time count that's done annually. So any annual numbers would be higher than this. And also just want to acknowledge that more than ever that people are constantly on the move as encampments are being restricted and broken up. It just means that people are on the move a lot more, which can make it really harder to engage and help people connect to housing. And so we're seeing that within the population as well. And then significant racial disparities in comparison, significant racial disparities as well. I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you.
And thank
Lindsay.
you. Sorry, I was rushed at the end.
It's okay. We will share out the local data afterwards, along with the other things we said we would. I really appreciate all of you joining us today. If you have a second, if you would take time to complete the evaluation to tell us what you thought of today and how we can improve for next time. My contact information is at the bottom of the page. Please feel free to reach out with follow-up questions or information that you'd like to share. And yeah, just thanks for sharing your time with us. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. And thank you, Lindsay, for joining us from all the way in Michigan today.
I'll see you guys on the next one.
Yeah, we'll see you, I think, next week.
Yeah, that's what I have it down as. So thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Is there an email for the